Ellen DeGeneres tried to embarrass Jasmine Crockett on TV. What happened next stunned the nation. The studio lights were hot, the crowd was electric, and America had no idea what was about to happen. Ellen DeGeneres leaned back in her iconic white chair, smiling the way only someone who believed they controlled the entire narrative could smile. Her audience laughed on cue, clapped on command, and followed every verbal breadcrumb like loyal spectators in a well-rehearsed play. Today, however, the script was about to be rewritten. Sitting across from her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, poised, unbothered. They thought they were inviting a viral moment. What they got was a reckoning broadcast live on daytime TV. I've got to say, Ellen chuckled, eyebrows raised. You had that finger going. Girl, Hugh. That attitude had hit like a slap, but wrapped in a joke. The kind of joke that had been used for decades to keep powerful black women in their place. The crowd laughed nervously at first, then louder as Ellen mimicked Jasmine's movements from a now infamous clip. Fingers wagging, voice sharp, animated, entertaining. But Jasmine didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. What she did next would flip the power dynamics of the entire room, and soon after, the entire country. Funny, Jasmine said, voice calm but cutting. When men speak directly, they're called assertive. When women do it, we're emotional. And when black women speak up, suddenly, it's attitude. The room froze. Ellen blinked. Somewhere off stage, a producer whispered into a headset. Another scribbled something off a cue card like they were trying to erase the moment. But it was too late. The energy had shifted, permanently. No laugh track could save it. No commercial break could soften it. This wasn't just a guest refusing to play along. This was a woman reclaiming her narrative in a space that wasn't built for her. The air turned cold, not because of temperature, but because of clarity. This wasn't a meltdown. This was precision. And it had been building long before the cameras rolled. Earlier that day, Jasmine sat quietly in the green room. The makeup was done. The suit was pressed. Her team had run through possible jokes, barbed comments, even the risk of being edited to fit a stereotype. But Jasmine knew something they didn't. She wasn't here to survive the edit. She was here to interrupt the script. Her communications director, Talia, had been the first to raise the flag when the invitation came in. They're not asking you because they respect your policies, Talia had said. They're asking you because your clip went viral. They want attitude. They want the finger. The sass, not the substance. I know, Jasmine replied, but they don't get to write who I am. So she boarded the flight, alone in her row, headphones in, no music playing, just silence. That kind of silence that lives before a storm. Not chaos, stillness, controlled. And now, here she was on live TV facing off with one of the most beloved figures in American entertainment. A woman who had built her empire on kindness, but too often confused kindness with comfort. And when Jasmine's truth made the room uncomfortable, Ellen did what institutions of power always do. She tried to turn it into a joke, but Jasmine wasn't laughing, and neither was the audience, because they had seen something real, and for once, they weren't being told how to feel about it. They were watching a black woman refuse to shrink. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. It wasn't the kind of moment you cheer for. It was the kind of moment you remember. Backstage, panic flickered behind the smiles. Producers hustled. Assistants pretended to be busy. One camera operator paused, hand trembling slightly on the pan lever. Even the floor manager looked away from his clipboard. Jasmine sat in her seat like she'd always belonged there. And Ellen, for the first time in her long career, she didn't know what to say. She reached for her mug, smiling tightly. Well, I didn't mean anything by it, you know. I love strong women. I married one. It was the kind of defense only the comfortable try to use. I have a gay friend of feminism, but it wasn't working. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. I'm sure you do, she said, voice cool as marble. But loving strong women doesn't mean you get to reduce their power to a punchline. Boom. There it was, the detonation, quiet, surgical, final, somewhere in the back. A studio light hummed louder than the audience. This wasn't just a moment of confrontation. It was a moment of cultural clarity. A woman weaponized with nothing but truth, poise, and an unwavering refusal to be laughed away. And while Ellen scrambled to recover, Jasmine didn't move. Because in that silence, something sacred was happening. America wasn't watching a debate. They were watching a correction. And by the time the segment ended, it was no longer Ellen's show. It was Jasmine's. She hadn't taken the mic. She had taken the room. and soon, the internet would follow. But none of that mattered to Jasmine. Not the clicks, not the coverage, not the applause. She didn't come for attention. She came for respect. And respect, she knew, wasn't something you asked for. You modeled it, you held your ground. And if someone tried to laugh it off, you stared them in the face and made them sit in the silence they created. That's what Jasmine Crockett did. Live, on air, and America felt every second of it. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't raised her voice. And yet, by the time the credits rolled, it was clear Jasmine Crockett hadn't just sat through an interview, she had redefined the terms of the stage itself. And somewhere behind the cameras, people were still scrambling to understand how. Ellen's team moved quickly, texting PR contacts, refreshing Twitter feeds, whispering things like, "We can reframe it, and maybe we cut it before upload." But the damage, or as some would soon call it, the clarity had already spread beyond the walls of the soundstage. Because what had just happened wasn't a segment gone wrong. It was a mirror held up to an industry that had spent decades mastering the art of soft ridicule under bright lights. But to really understand what detonated in that moment, you'd have to rewind. Not just to the morning of the taping, but further back. Back to the email that hit Jasmine's inbox on a quiet Thursday in D.C. Subject line: The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Appearance request for Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Talia, her longtime communications director, had stared at it for a full minute before even showing it to her. "Why Ellen?" she'd muttered under her breath, scrolling down the booking pitch. What's the angle? Jasmine was mid-sentence in a criminal justice policy meeting when Talia slipped her phone across the table. One glance, then Ellen A. raised brow, a long pause. That single name carried weight. Not just because Ellen was a TV icon, but because Jasmine had grown up watching her. Like many black women in America, Jasmine had often found herself caught between admiration for Ellen's success and the creeping discomfort of how she sometimes wielded it. In salons, in airports, on waiting room televisions, Jasmine had watched Ellen crack jokes that skimmed the edge of something deeper, something sharper, harmless, until they weren't. But this invite was different. This wasn't about her being a guest on a friendly show. This was about a space not built for women like her. And she knew it. "You think it's a good idea?" Talia asked later, as they reviewed the production notes in Jasmine's office. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She scrolled through clips of other political guests Ellen had hosted: light banter, safe topics, moments trimmed for virality but rarely for depth. She clicked on one interview with a senator who laughed awkwardly while Ellen mimicked his hand gestures. Another clip showed Ellen turning a conversation about systemic inequality into a punchline about airport security lines. Jasmine closed the laptop. "We don't control the edit," Talia reminded her again. "I know," Jasmine replied, slowly, "but I also know who I am." They accepted the invite, but not blindly. The following week was rehearsal after rehearsal, studying Ellen's rhythm, reviewing her subtle jabs disguised as jokes, analyzing how other black women had fared in that chair. Not one of them had walked away unchanged. They planned for everything: talking points on policy, family anecdotes that felt relatable, even what Jasmine would wear: powerful, professional, nothing that could be spun into too flashy, too cold, or too fierce. Because in that kind of space, everything was a calculation. Every smile, every pause, every syllable, and most of all, every silence. Still, as Jasmine boarded the plane to Los Angeles, she wasn't nervous. She was alert. There's a difference. She sat by the window, headphones in, but no sound playing. Her body was still. Her mind was loud, not chaotic, but alive. She knew what awaited her. The green room was pristine to pristine, scented like lavender and pressure. The assistant producers were pleasant, all smiles and compliments. But Jasmine could feel the script being shaped in real time. "You look bold," one of them said, eyes scanning her blazer a little too long. "She means powerful," Jasmine replied, without blinking. Behind her, Talia didn't hide the glare. In the corner, Jasmine spotted a cue card with the words "Attitude in Congress" scribbled at the top. There it was. The setup. The whole thing. They weren't interested in her work. They were interested in the performance. More specifically, they wanted that performance the viral Jasmine. The one who had, months ago, lit into a committee member on live C-SPAN, dissecting his half-truths with surgical precision and the kind of fire cable news liked to package as sass. But Jasmine hadn't gone viral because she was angry. She'd gone viral because she was clear. There's a difference. Backstage, the producers explained the segment's flow. Light banter up top. couple quick policy questions, then an audience Q&A. One of them said, with the warm tone of someone explaining a ride at Disneyland, "We keep it fun. Ellen may tease you a little, but it's all love." Jasmine tilted her head. "Tease what, exactly?" "Oh, you know." The man chuckled. Tone, passion, the finger thing. She didn't respond, but in that pause a line was drawn. Later, as she walked the hallway lined with photos of past guests, mostly actors, comedians, athletes, she stopped in front of Michelle Obama's framed still. That interview had gone well, but even the former First Lady hadn't been spared the backhanded jokes about her arms, or her seriousness. "You ready?" Talia asked, catching up. Jasmine nodded. "I've been ready. They just didn't expect it." And they hadn't. 10 minutes before taping, Ellen still hadn't come down to greet her. Most guests got a hello, a quick handshake, but not today. Instead, Jasmine was handed a bottle of water by a young intern who whispered, "My mom follows everything you say. Thank you for how you carry yourself." That moment meant more than any segment ever could, because it reminded Jasmine why she was really here, not to entertain, not to appease, but to be heard. When the stage lights hit her and her name was called, Jasmine walked out with the stillness of someone who had counted every breath before stepping into battle. She knew how they'd try to frame her, but what they didn't know was that the frame was too small for the truth she carried. And when Ellen launched that first verbal jab packaged as humor, wrapped in applause, coated in comfort, Jasmine knew the time for smiling was over. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to raise the mirror and let the whole country see what had been hiding in plain sight. And that's exactly what she did. She didn't argue. She didn't correct. She didn't blink. She held the mirror up, slowly, carefully, and forced the room, and the host, and the millions watching to finally look. Because in that moment, Ellen wasn't facing a guest. She was facing a woman who had come prepared to dismantle the unspoken rules of daytime television. Rules like, don't make the host uncomfortable. Rules like, keep it light, even when it's heavy. Rules like, laugh, even when you're the joke. But Jasmine didn't come to play by those rules. She came to show the cost of them. And it started with just one word: attitude. Ellen said with her signature smirk, turning to the audience for effect. The way you just let him have it. You had that finger up, like, let me tell you something. She pantomimed Jasmine's now viral hand motion, exaggerating it with a laugh. The audience chuckled, a few clapped, and Jasmine just stared, not cruel, not angry, just quiet. For 3 full seconds, she didn't move. And in those 3 seconds, the tone of the show began to crack. Then, calmly, she leaned forward. "I've noticed something," she said, voice steady. "When men are direct, they're called assertive. When women are direct, we're called emotional. But when black women speak up, suddenly it's..." She paused, just long enough. "Attitude." The laughter stopped. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let the silence do the cutting, because that word attitude wasn't harmless. Not to her. Not to any black woman who had ever been told to tone it down, or watch your voice, or smile more. It wasn't just a word. It was a muzzle, disguised as feedback, that's dressed up as humor. And now, Ellen was on the wrong side of it. She tried to recover. "Well, I didn't mean anything by it," she said, waving her hand like she could swipe the moment away. "You know I love strong women. I married one." There were a few scattered laughs, nervous ones, but Jasmine wasn't laughing. "I'm sure you do," she replied, her voice cool but deliberate. "But loving strong women doesn't mean you get to reduce their power to a punchline." Boom. There it was. The balance of power shifted so subtly, but so absolutely, that even the audience trained to clap at flashing signs and smile at soft jazz transitions felt the temperature change. Ellen blinked and blinked again. Because what was happening now wasn't part of the outline. This wasn't a segment anymore. This was exposure. The camera operator behind Jasmine didn't flinch, but his frame tightened instinctively, as if trying to zoom out of the moment. Behind the scenes, a floor manager glanced at the control booth. Someone was muttering into a headset, and yet Jasmine never looked away. This wasn't confrontation for drama. This was clarity. "You know," she continued, now turning her body slightly toward the audience, "there's this expectation that black women are supposed to laugh along when someone pokes fun at our tone. Like, we're supposed to be in on the joke, even when the joke's on us." The room had gone silent again. Not the kind of silence you script. The kind that lives in the space between discomfort and recognition. "I'm not here to be funny," she said, still calm. I'm here to be heard. A few audience members nodded slowly. Others just sat frozen. No applause sign blinked, no music queued up. Ellen leaned back in her chair. I was just referencing what's already online. The viral stuff. People love it, she said, her smile a little tighter now, her eyes scanning for an escape route. Jasmine didn't take the bait. I know what they love, she said. They love the sound of someone standing up for themselves. But sometimes, what goes viral isn't what's most valuable. Silence again. And this time, it was heavier. This wasn't a moment slipping away from Ellen. This was a moment being claimed by someone else. You invited me here to talk, Jasmine said, folding her hands in her lap. So, let's talk. Not just about the moments people clipped for the internet, but about why those moments happened. Why I had to speak that way just to be heard. Just to be taken seriously in a room full of men who wouldn't listen until I raised my voice. That hit. Not just Ellen, not just the audience, but every viewer watching at home who had ever seen a woman, especially a black woman, get pushed to the brink of silence, then blamed for finally breaking it. The crowd began to clap. Not wildly, not cheerfully, but purposefully. Because something was shifting. And they knew it. Ellen nodded stiffly, her smile now hanging by threads. She took a long sip from her mug. So, you're saying you don't regret it? She asked. Jasmine tilted her head. Not to be cute, but to remind everyone who was really controlling the conversation now. I don't regret being heard, she said. I regret that I had to fight that hard just to be treated like an equal. The line landed like a verdict. There was no applause cue needed this time. The audience clapped anyway. Not everyone, but enough. And in those claps scattered, sure, but sincere you could hear the power recalibrating. Jasmine leaned forward, voice quiet but sharp. But did I get their respect, she asked? That's what matters. And that question did what no closing joke, no viral dance clip, no clever edit ever could. It turned the moment into memory. Ellen opened her mouth to pivot, to change course, to rescue what was left of the segment. But Jasmine had already done something more lasting. She had replaced entertainment with accountability. And as the segment drew to a close, the tension didn't fade. It settled. It thickened. Because the audience, the producers, and even Ellen herself knew what had just happened wasn't a mishap. It was a message. And it was far from over. Because some moments don't end when the camera cuts. Some moments don't fade with the music. Some moments don't ask permission to echo. They just do. Jasmine Crockett's question. But did I get their respect? Didn't just close the segment. It cracked open the truth. Ellen sat back in her chair, smiling because she had to, not because she wanted to. The red light on the camera was still on, but the spotlight had shifted and not in her favor. For years, she had shaped stories with clever edits and applause cues, crafted redemption arcs, and built a brand on kindness. But today, that kindness looked thin, performative, hollow, and Jasmine. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't folded. She had simply refused to play the part they wrote for her. The music kicked in too upbeat, too artificial, and the audience clapped automatically, trained more by habit than feeling. Ellen reached for her mug again, offering a rehearsed smile. Well, tell us something light, she said quickly. Changing gears? What's the most surprising thing about life in Congress? Jasmine didn't answer right away. She let the weight of her previous words hang in the air. Let the audience feel what Ellen was trying to distract them from. Then, with a gentle smile, not smug, not angry, just deliberate, she said. Most surprising. Probably how often people expect me to shrink. There it was again. Not louder. Just deeper. This time, the laughter that followed wasn't nervous. It wasn't forced. It was real. It came not from a punchline, but from a collective recognition that something irreversible had just occurred. The audience leaned in. They weren't watching a guest anymore. They were watching a shift in the room's gravity. And though the show soon rolled into commercial, though the screen went dark, the tension didn't vanish. It lingered in the air, in the expressions of the crew, in the silence that settled backstage like smoke after a fire. A buzzer sounded from the control room. Break time. The applause sign blinked, and the crowd obeyed, clapping politely, confused, unsettled, intrigued. Jasmine stood, not angrily, not triumphantly, just ready. She didn't say a word to Ellen, who sat at her desk pretending to sip from her mug, pretending not to notice the quiet revolution that had just taken place across from her. She walked off stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor panels. Each step is a punctuation mark. Each silenced a sentence Ellen never saw coming. Backstage, everything had changed. Producers whispered faster. Assistants paced. Someone replayed the footage already captured, mouthing the words under their breath. She said what needed to be said, Talia murmured, catching up with her as she stepped back into the green room. You didn't flinch. I wasn't there to perform, Jasmine said, dropping into the chair like a weight had shifted, but not in her, around her. That was what they didn't expect. She wasn't there to charm. She was there to interrupt. And that interruption was about to go viral, because just a few feet away, in the control room, someone had already sent the uncut segment to post-production, and another assistant who hadn't even looked Jasmine in the eye earlier was now texting her cousin, "You're not going to believe what just happened on set." Meanwhile, on Twitter, a producer from another network had already posted, "Jasmine Crockett just changed the entire energy on Ellen's stage. You'll know when you see it." By the time Jasmine opened her phone, she had 26 unread messages, 2 from reporters, 4 from staffers back in D.C., 1 from her sister, and 1, blinking at the top, from her mother. You didn't let them laugh you into silence. I'm proud of you. She stared at the words for a long time, then smiled, not for the show, not for the cameras, just for herself. Across the hallway, Ellen was pacing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. That wasn't the vibe, she muttered to one of her senior producers. It felt combative. She didn't yell, the producer said, trying to stay diplomatic. She didn't attack you. She just didn't give you what you expected. She flipped it on me, Ellen replied, almost in disbelief. I was trying to keep it light. You kept it dismissive, the producer mumbled under his breath. Ellen didn't hear, but the country would, because already clips were being cut. Short ones, long ones, split-screen edits of Ellen smirking while Jasmine calmly corrected her. TikToks pairing Jasmine's lines with footage of other black women being mocked for simply speaking Kamala Harris, Serena Williams, Michelle Obama. People weren't just watching for a moment. They were mapping a pattern, and the hashtags began. Orange respect black women. Genre Jasmine Crockett. Was right. No, she attitude. Is code. By the end of the day, one clip had already hit 1.7 million views. By that evening, the number would double. And Jasmine. She didn't repost it. She didn't tweet a victory thread. She didn't appear on MSNBC that night or accept the invitation from The View. She just sat in her hotel room, legs curled under her, sipping lukewarm tea, watching a 15-second TikTok loop quietly on her screen. The caption read, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. She closed the phone. She didn't need to say anything else. She already had." And America, whether it liked it or not, had heard her. But listening is one thing. Reconciling with what you've heard, that's where the real reckoning begins. By sunrise the next morning, the ripple had become a wave. Major news outlets ran headlines not about the usual Ellen Bander or celebrity cameos, but about the clip that had stopped the room. The quote was, "Everywhere I don't regret being heard. I regret that I had to fight that hard just to be treated like an equal." It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a measure. Cable news looped it, morning podcasts dissected it, and on social media. Jasmine's silence was louder than any press release Ellen's PR team could produce, because while Ellen's Twitter account posted a short, shiny apology. Yesterday's conversation with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett reminded me listening isn't passive. It's active. I'm learning. People weren't buying it. Too little. Too filtered. One reply read, "This isn't a teachable moment for Ellen, it's a pattern," another said. And perhaps the most shared response of all, Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral. She went clear, and that's what scared them. But Jasmine wasn't watching the numbers. She was watching the shift, because something was changing not just for her, but for every woman who'd ever been asked to smile through it, laugh it off, be less so someone else could feel more. Requests poured in. CNN, Joy Reid, Good Morning America. Producers from late-night shows wanted to frame it as a tough but beautiful moment of growth. Streaming platforms inquired about docuseries rights. A network exec texted Talia one line. "We may have misjudged her." No kidding. Talia, ever the strategist, began organizing the flood. Prioritize requests that let Jasmine speak uninterrupted. Decline anything that uses the words fiery or feisty. No offers from outlets that once called her divisive. But Jasmine, she wasn't rushing to speak, because she understood what the country didn't. Yet the clip was not the victory. The pause after it, the silence she held, the breath she didn't waste. Explaining herself, that was the revolution. And she wasn't going to dilute it by spinning it into a media tour. So instead of capitalizing, she went quiet. Not out of avoidance, out of strategy. Let the country sit with it. Let them feel the discomfort of a woman who didn't blink when asked to shrink. Because it wasn't just Ellen who felt exposed. Across the country, conversations were erupting in classrooms, boardrooms, living rooms, in Detroit. An English teacher printed Jasmine's quote and taped it on the chalkboard. "Your voice doesn't need fixing. The world just hasn't learned how to hear it yet." In Oakland, a local radio station devoted 2 hours to black women, calling in and sharing the first time they were labeled too much for simply being themselves. And in Tulsa, a teenage girl stood up in a rec center, clutching her notebook, telling Jasmine what no headline had captured. "You didn't get mad. You just said what it was. And I didn't know we were allowed to do that on TV. This wasn't virality. This was vindication." But while Jasmine's moment was stirring cultural conversations, Ellen's machine was still in damage control mode. Behind the studio's glass doors, meetings stretched late into the night. Her publicist pressed for a second statement more heartfelt, more vulnerable. One producer suggested a panel of black women on the next episode. Another floated a sit-down with Jasmine unedited, raw, reparative, but none of it landed. Because everyone could feel it. The era of controlled narratives was cracking. And Ellen, for all her years of scripting resolution into every ending, had just encountered something unscripted, and it showed. In private, her frustration boiled over. "She turned it on me. Ellen snapped during a strategy meeting. I didn't bring her on to get schooled. I brought her on because her clip was trending." And there it was. The unspoken truth spoken aloud. It was never about amplifying Jasmine's voice. It was about owning it, until Jasmine refused to let them. She didn't shout. She didn't storm out. She didn't accuse. She just held the space and let the weight of her presence break every expectation built around her. Later that week, a columnist wrote, "The brilliance of Jasmine Crockett's moment wasn't in how she responded. It was in how she refused to let the moment be stolen, softened, or spun. She didn't perform. She revealed." That word stuck, revealed, because when someone chooses not to shrink, the room around them often does. And that's what Ellen had felt. Not attack, not ambush, exposure. Suddenly, the warmth of her brand so carefully cultivated felt cold under the studio lights. Not because Jasmine said anything cruel, but because she said something true, and the truth didn't flatter her. So, while the internet praised Jasmine for her grace and strength, Ellen's silence became a character of its own. Every day she didn't address it directly. The void grew. She had crafted a world where kindness was currency. But kindness that disappears when it's inconvenient, that's not kindness. That's image management. And Jasmine had come for something far more dangerous than image. She had come for integrity. Which is why, when Oprah's team reached out asking if Jasmine would appear on a special episode about women reclaiming their voices, Talia asked her, "Should we take it Jasmine didn't even look up from her phone?" "No," she said, "let it breathe," because she wasn't chasing cameras. She was letting the lesson land, letting a generation of girls know you can be direct without apologizing. You can be visible without being entertainment. You can take the seat and refuse to shrink in it. And for the first time, those lessons weren't confined to speeches or classrooms or panel discussions. They were playing out on TV, in real time, across a country just starting to understand what it means to actually listen. But the thing about listening, once it starts, it doesn't stay confined to studios or screen time. It seeps into hallways, into classrooms, into policy meetings, into the quiet corners of places that were never built to hear you in the first place. 3 weeks had passed. The viral clip had stopped trending. The hashtags had faded beneath newer noise. The outrage had moved on like it always does. But something hadn't faded. The resonance, it lingered not in headlines or interviews, but in the eyes of the people who had finally seen themselves reflected in a woman who didn't smile to survive. That was the power of what Jasmine Crockett had done. Not just confronting Ellen DeGeneres live on television. Not just holding the room when the host lost the script. She'd modeled something that couldn't be filtered, cut, or spun. Presence, unapologetic, uncut, unperformed. And that presence was now finding its way into places Ellen's cameras had never reached, like Tulsa, Oklahoma, a modest recreation center gym, folding chairs lined in uneven rows, no press, no lights, just a mic stand, a portable podium, and about 70 people teachers, Single moms, students, organizers, uncles in baseball caps, daughters in braids. Jasmine had flown in that morning, not for an appearance, not for a headline, but because a local teacher had written her a letter. Not an email, not a tag, an actual handwritten letter. It read, "You didn't just speak for you. You made it safer for my students to speak for themselves." That was all it took. So here she was, no makeup crew, no studio lighting, no microphones clipped to her lapel, just a notepad with policy notes on education equity, a bottle of water, and that same steel-spined calm. The room had just finished a round of Q&A when it happened. A girl maybe 15 stood up from the back row, tall, quiet, braids pulled into a bun, notebook clutched like armor. Her voice barely carried at first. "Hi, my name is Alondra." Jasmine smiled, gesturing gently. "Hey, Alondra." The girl swallowed hard, then kept going. "I just wanted to say I saw you on Ellen," she said, "and I'd never seen someone talk like that on TV before. You didn't get mad. You just said what it was." The room shifted. No phones up, no recording, just presence. "I got called too loud in class last week," Alondra continued. "But I was just answering the question. The teacher said my tone was aggressive." She trailed off. "I don't know," she mumbled. "It made me feel small." Jasmine stood, no spotlight, no stagecraft, just her. She walked slowly toward the back of the room, toward Alondra, not to perform, but to close the distance. When she reached her, Jasmine knelt slightly, just enough so their eyes met. Then, with the same voice that had once quieted a national studio, she said, "Let me tell you something." The room was still. "Your voice doesn't need fixing," Jasmine said. "This world just hasn't caught up to your volume." Alondra blinked fast, holding back tears. "They'll call it too much," Jasmine continued. "Too passionate, too sharp, too everything. But don't ever confuse their discomfort with your value." She let the silence rest for a second, then added softly, "You're not too much. You're just enough for the room to expand." A few people in the back wiped their eyes. No applause, just reverence. Later, as the event wrapped and chairs scraped the floor, a retired pastor in a corduroy blazer approached Jasmine. He took her hand gently and said, "You didn't raise your voice, but you raised our bar." Jasmine smiled, not out of pride, out of clarity. That was the goal all along, not to dominate a moment, not to trend, but to raise the standard for what it means to be heard. Back in the car, Talia scrolled through her phone, the aftermath still buzzing faintly online. Newsletters dissecting the ripple effects, academic blogs unpacking media bias, another op-ed titled, "The Silence That Spoke Louder Than Ellen." But Jasmine wasn't scrolling. She was looking out the window. A group of kids were playing on a cracked-up basketball court, their shouts mixing with the crunch of leaves and chain-link echoes. It wasn't special, but it was sacred, the way normal things are when people forget they're being watched. "You think they'll remember any of this?" Jasmine asked, eyes still fixed on the court. Talia glanced up from her screen. "I think Alondra will." Jasmine nodded. Good, because she didn't need another headline. She didn't need to go viral again. What mattered most had nothing to do with exposure. It had everything to do with impact. And sometimes, the greatest impact doesn't roar. It whispers through generations. It sits with the girls who almost quieted themselves, but didn't. It lives in the crackle of school hallways, in the footnotes of essays written with new confidence, in the raised hands that don't shake when speaking truth. That's where the real aftermath blooms. Not on stage, but in rooms like that. One in Tulsa, in Detroit, in Baton Rouge, in Phoenix, where girls like Alondra realize they don't have to perform to belong. They just have to stand. And when someone tries to reduce their strength to entertainment, they'll know better. Because Jasmine Crockett showed them how, not with a mic drop, not with a viral clapback, but by refusing to shrink, by walking into a room built to contain her and choosing to expand instead. Let that be the legacy. Let that be the echo. Because every generation deserves a blueprint for what power looks like when it doesn't yell, it just exists. Unapologetically, unedited, unmistakably. And sometimes, the boldest thing a woman can do is stay still and let the room adjust to her.